Chapter 5 A 4-Day Planet by H. Beam Piper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 4-Day Planet. Chapter 5 Meeting Out of Order. Dad called the spaceport hospital after dinner and talked to Doc Rojansky. Morrell was asleep and in no danger whatever. They'd given him a couple of injections and a sedative, and his system was throwing off the poison satisfactorily. He'd be all right, but they thought he ought to be allowed to rest at the hospital for a while. By then, it was time for me to leave for Hunter's Hall. Julio and Mrs. Layden were having their dinner, and Dad and Bish went up to the editorial office. I didn't have a car. Hunter's Hall was only a half-dozen blocks south of the Times, toward the waterfront. I carried my radio under false pretense, slung from my shoulder, and started downtown on foot. The business district was pretty well lighted, both from the ceiling and by the stores and restaurants. Most of the latter were in the open, with small kitchen and storage buildings. At a table at one of them, I saw two petty officers from the Peenemünde with a couple of girls, so I knew the ship wasn't leaving immediately. Going past the municipal building, I saw some activity, and an unusually large number of police gathered around the vehicle port. Ravik must have his doubts about how the price cut was going to be received, and Mort Hallstock was mobilizing his stormtroopers to give him support in case he needed it. I called in about that, and Dad told me fretfully to be sure to stay out of trouble. Hunter's Hall was a 4-story building, fairly substantial, as buildings that don't have to support the roof go, with a landing stage on top and a vehicle park underneath. As I came up, I saw a lot of cars and jeeps and ship's boats grounded in and around it, and a crowd of men, almost all of them in boat clothes and wearing whiskers, including quite a few characters who had never been out in a hunter ship in their lives, but were members in the best of good standing of the cooperative. I also saw a few of Hallstock's uniformed thugs standing around with their thumbs in their gun belts, or twirling their truncheons. I took an escalator up to the second floor, which was one big room, with the escalators and elevators in the rear. It was the social room, decorated with photos and models and solidographs of hunter ships, photos of record-sized monsters lashed alongside ships before cutting up, group pictures of ship's crews, monster tusks, dried slashers and hellbird fish, and a whole monster head, its tusked mouth open. There was a big crowd there, too, at the bar, at the game machines, or just standing around in groups, talking. I saw Tom Kuyvelson and his father and Oscar Fujisawa, and went over to join them. Joe Kuyvelson is just an outsize edition of his son, with a blond beard that's had 35 years more growth. Oscar is skipper of the Pequod. He wouldn't have looked baffled if Bish Ware had called him Captain Ahab, and while his family name is Old Terran Japanese, he had blue eyes and red hair and beard. He was almost as big as Joe Kuyvelson. "Hello, Walt," Joe greeted me. "What's this Tom's been telling me about Bish Ware shooting a tread snail that was going to sting Mr. Morrell?" "Just about that," I said. "That snail must have crawled out from between 2 stacks of wax as we came up. We never saw it till it was all over. It was right beside Morrell and had its stinger up when Bish shot it." "He took an awful chance," Kuyvelson said. "He might have shot Mr. Morrell." I suppose it would look that way to Joe. He is the planet's worst pistol shot, so according to him, nobody can hit anything with a pistol. "He wouldn't have taken any chance not shooting," I said. "If he hadn't, we'd be running the Morrell story with black borders." Another man came up, skinny, red hair, sharp-pointed nose. His name was Al Davis, and he was Joe Kuyvelson's engineer's helper. He wanted to know about the tread snail shooting, so I had to go over it again. I hadn't anything to add to what Tom had told them already, but I was the Times, and if the Times says so, it's true. Well, I wouldn't want any drunk like Bish Ware shooting around me with a pistol, Joe Kyvelson said. That's relative too. Joe doesn't drink. Don't kid yourself, Joe, Oscar told him. I saw Bish shoot a knife out of a man's hand one time in One-Eye Swanson's. Didn't scratch the guy, hit the blade. One-Eye has the knife with the bullet mark on it over his back bar now. Well, was he drunk then? Joe asked. Well, he had to hang on to the bar with one hand while he fired with the other. Then he turned to me. How is Morrell now? He asked. I told him what the hospital had given us. Everybody seemed much relieved. I wouldn't have thought that a celebrated author, of whom nobody had ever heard before, would be the center of so much interest in monster hunting circles. I kept looking at my watch while we were talking. After a while, the Times newscast came on the big screen across the room, and everybody moved over toward it. They watched the Peenemünde being towed down and berthed, and the audio-visual interview with Morrell. Then Dad came on the screen with a record player in front of them and gave them a play-off of my interview with Leo Belcher. Ordinary bad language I do not mind. I'm afraid I use a little myself, while struggling with some of the worn-out equipment we have at the paper. But when Belcher began explaining about how the price of wax had to be cut again to 35 centisols a pound, the language those hunters used positively smelled. I noticed, though, that a lot of the crowd weren't saying anything at all. They would be Ravik's boys, and they would have orders not to start anything before the meeting. "Wonder if he's going to try to give us that stuff about substitutes," Oscar said. "Well, what are you going to do?" I asked. "I'll tell you what we're not going to do," Joe Kyvelson said. "We're not going to take his price cut. If he won't pay our price, he can use his, deleted by censor, substitutes." "You can't sell wax anywhere else, can you?" "Is that so we can't?" Joe started. Before he could say anything else, Oscar was interrupting. "We can eat for a while, even if we don't sell wax. Sigurd and Gazori'll carry us for a while and make loans on wax. But if the wax stops coming in, Kapstad Chemical's going to start wondering why." By this time, other Javelin men came drifting over. Ramon Llewellyn, the mate, and Abdullah Monahan, the engineer, and Abe Clifford, the navigator, and some others. I talked with some of them, and then drifted off in the direction of the bar, where I found another hunter captain, Mohandas Gandhi Feinberg, whom everybody simply called the Mahatma. He didn't resemble his namesake. He had a curly black beard with a twisted black cigar sticking out of it, and nobody, after one look at him, would have mistaken him for any apostle of nonviolence. He had a proposition he was enlisting support for. He wanted balloting at meetings to be limited to captains of active hunter ships, the captains to vote according to expressed wishes of a majority of their crews. It was a good scheme, though it would have sounded better if the man who was advocating it hadn't been a captain himself. At least, it would have disenfranchised all Ravik's permanently unemployed hunters. The only trouble was, there was no conceivable way of getting it passed. It was too much like trying to curtail the powers of Parliament by Act of Parliament. The gang from the street level started coming up, and scattered in twos and threes around the hall, ready for trouble. I put on my radio when I joined the Kyvelsons and Oscar, and I kept it on, circulating around and letting it listen to the conversations. The Ravik people were either saying nothing, or arguing that Belcher was doing the best he could, and if Kapstad wouldn't pay more than 35 centisols, it wasn't his fault. Finally, the call bell for the meeting began clanging, and the crowd began sliding over toward the elevators and escalators. The meeting room was on the floor above, at the front of the building, beyond a narrow hall and a door at which a couple of Ravik henchmen wearing guns and sergeant-at-arms brassards were making everybody check their knives and pistols. They passed me by without getting my arsenal, which consisted of a sleep gas projector camouflaged as a jumbo-sized lighter, and 20 saws in 2 rolls of 40 quarter saws each. One of these inside a fist can make a big difference. Ravik and Belcher and the secretary of the co-op, who was a little scrawny, henpecked husband type who never had an opinion of his own in his life, were all sitting back of a big desk on a dais in front. After as many of the crowd who could had found seats, and the rest, including the press, were standing in the rear, Ravik pounded with the chunk of monster tusk he used for a gavel and called the meeting to order. "There's a bunch of old business," he said, "but I'm going to rule that aside for the moment. We have with us this evening our representative on Terra, Mr. Leo Belcher, whom I wish to present. Mr. Belcher." Belcher got up. Ravik started clapping his hands to indicate that applause was in order. A few of his zombies clapped their hands. Everybody else was quiet. Belcher held up a hand. "Please, don't applaud," he begged. "What I have to tell you isn't anything to applaud about." "You're tootin' well right it isn't," somebody directly in front of me said, very distinctly. "I'm very sorry to have to bring this news to you, but the fact is that Capstad Chemical Products Limited is no longer able to pay 45 centisols a pound. This price is being scaled down to 35 centisols. I want you to understand that Capstad Chemical wants to give you every cent they can, but business conditions no longer permit them to pay the old price. 35 is the absolute maximum they can pay and still meet competition." "Oh, knock it off, Belcher!" somebody shouted. "We heard all that rot on the screen." "How about our contract?" somebody else asked. "We do have a contract with Capstad, don't we?" "Well, the contract will have to be renegotiated. They'll pay 35 centisols, or they'll pay nothing." "They can try getting along without wax, or try buying it somewhere else." "Yes, those wonderful synthetic substitutes." "Mr. Chairman," Oscar Fujisawa called out, "I move that this organization reject the price of 35 centisols a pound for tallow wax, as offered by, or through, Leo Belcher at this meeting." Ravik began clamoring that Oscar was out of order, that Leo Belcher had the floor. "I second Captain Fujisawa's motion," Mohandas Feinberg said. "And Leo Belcher doesn't have the floor. He's not a member of the cooperative," Tom Kivelsson declared. "He's our hired employee, and as soon as this present motion is dealt with, I intend moving that we fire him and hire somebody else." "I move to amend Captain Fujisawa's motion," Joe Kivelsson said. "I move that the motion, as amended, read, and stipulate a price of 75 centisols a pound." "You're crazy!" Belcher almost screamed. 75 was the old price, from which he and Ravik had been reducing until they'd gotten down to 45. Just at that moment, my radio began making a small fuss. I unhooked the handphone and brought it to my face. "Yeah?" It was Bish Ware's voice. "Walt, get hold of the Kivelsons and get them out of Hunter's Hall as fast as you can," he said. "I just got a tip from one of my parishioners. Ravik's going to stage a riot to give Hallstock's cops an excuse to raid the meeting. They want the Kivelsons." "Roger." I hung up, and as soon as I did, I could hear Joe Kivelsson shouting, "You think we don't get any news on this planet? Tallow wax has been selling for the same price on Terra that it did 8 years ago, when you two crooks started cutting the price. Why, the very ship Belcher came here on brought the quotations on the commodity market." I edged through the crowd till I was beside Oscar Fujisawa. I decided the truth would need a little editing. I didn't want to use Bish Ware as my source. "Oscar, Dad just called me," I told him. "A tip came into the Times that Ravik's boys are going to fake a riot and Hallstock's cops are going to raid the meeting. They want Joe and Tom. You know what they'll do if they get hold of them." "Shot while resisting arrest. You sure this is a good tip, though?" Across the room, somebody jumped to his feet, kicking over a chair. "That's a double 2M- lie, you Antoine Chardlou so-and-so!" somebody yelled. "Who are you calling a so-and-so, you thus-and-soing such-and-such?" somebody else yelled back, and a couple more chairs got smashed, and a swirl of fighting started. "Yes, it is," Oscar decided. "Let's go." We started plowing through the crowd toward where the Kivelsons and a couple more of the Javelin crew were clumped. I got one of the rolls of quarter soles into my right fist and let Oscar go ahead. He has more mass than I have. It was a good thing I did, because before we had gone 10 feet, some character got between us, dragged a 2-foot length of inch-and-a-half high-pressure hose out of his pant leg, and started to swing it at the back of Oscar's head. I promptly clipped him behind the ear with a fistful of money, and down he went. Oscar, who must have eyes in the back of his head, turned and grabbed the hose out of his hand before he dropped it, using it to clout somebody in front of him. Somebody else came pushing toward us, and I was about to clip him too when he yelled, "Watch it, Walt! I'm with it!" It was Cesario Vieira, another Javelin man. He's engaged to Linda Kivelson, Joe's daughter, and Tom's sister, the one going to school on Terra. Then we had reached Tom and Joe Kivelson. Oscar grabbed Joe by the arm. "Come on, Joe, let's get moving," he said. "Hallstock's Gestapo are on the way. They have orders to get you dead or alive." "Like blazes," Joe told him. "I never chickened out on a fight yet, and—" That's what I'd been afraid of. Joe is like a Zarathustra Veltbeast. The only tactics he knows is headlong attack. "You want to get your crew and your son killed, and yourself along with them?" Oscar asked him. "That's what'll happen if the cops catch you. Now are you coming, or will I have to knock you senseless and drag you out?" Fortunately, at that moment, somebody took a swing at Joe and grazed his cheek. It was a good thing that was all he did. He was wearing brass knuckles. Joe went down a couple of feet, bending at the knees, and caught this fellow around the hips with both hands, straightening and lifting him over his head. Then he threw him over the heads of the people in front of him. There were yells where the human missile landed. "That's the stuff, Joe!" Oscar shouted. "Come on, we got them on the run." That, of course, converted a strategic retreat into an attack. We got Joe aimed toward the doors, and before he knew it, we were out in the hall by the elevators. There were a couple of Ravik's men, with sergeant-at-arms armbands, and 2 city cops. One of the latter got in Joe's way. Joe punched him in the face and knocked him back about 10 feet in a sliding stagger before he dropped. The other cop grabbed me by the left arm. I slugged him under the jaw with my 10-sol right and knocked him out, and felt the wrapping on the coin roll break and the quarters come loose in my hand. Before I could drop them into my jacket pocket and get out the other roll, one of the sergeants-at-arms drew a gun. I just hurled a handful of coins at him. He dropped the pistol and put both hands to his face, howling in pain. I gave a small mental howl myself when I thought of all the nice things I could have bought for 10 sols. One of Joe Kivelson's followers stooped and scooped up the fallen pistol, firing a couple of times with it. Then we all rushed Joe into one of the elevators and crowded in behind him, and as I turned to start it down, I could hear police sirens from the street, and also from the landing stage above. In the hall outside the meeting room, 4 or 5 of Ravik's Friedrich mercenaries were down on all fours scrabbling for coins, and the rest of the pursuers from the meeting room were stumbling and tripping over them. I wished I'd brought a camera along too. The public would have loved a shot of that. I lifted the radio and spoke into it. "This is Walter Boyd, returning you now to the regular entertainment program." A second later, the thing whistled at me. As the car started down and the doors closed, I lifted the handphone. It was Bish Ware again. "We're going down in the elevator to second level down," I said. "I have Joe and Tom and Oscar Fujisawa and a few of the Javelin crew with me. The place is crawling with cops now." "Go to third level down and get up on the catwalk on the right," Bish said. "I'll be along to pick you up." "Roger, we'll be looking for you." The car stopped at second level down. I punched a button and sent it down another level. Joe Kyvelson, who was dabbing at his cheek with a piece of handkerchief tissue, wanted to know what was up. "We're getting a pickup," I told him. "Vehicle from the Times." I thought it would save arguments if I didn't mention who was bringing it. End of Chapter 5.